Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I've got a full tank review for you on one of the oldest Tier 8 premium medium tanks in the game, the T26E4 Super Pershing. The Super Pershing is one of the most heavily armoured Tier 8 vehicles in the game, which is able to take a gigantic beating. And it's top tier very often because it never has to meet Tier 10 tanks. In addition, the vehicle is one of the cheapest premium vehicles in the game at only 7,200 gold, yet it still makes gigantic amounts of credits. Again, and again. So if that sounds like the vehicle for you, then hang around. I've got some Ace Tanker gameplay coming right up after I run down the statistics of this vehicle, and if you have no interest in playing this slow lumbering beast, then I'll tell you how to take them out effectively on the battlefield and to stop their riot shields from giving you an absolute headache. So let's compare the premium T26E4 Super Pershing to the M26 Pershing, the relatively slow FE4202P, and also the T34-3 and the FCM50T, which are kind of medium tanks that also have preferential matchmaking. And I hasten to add that the M26 Pershing and the FE4202 both do not have preferential matchmaking, so take that into consideration when I'm discussing these statistics. So immediately we see that the DPM of all of these medium tanks is rather low indeed, way worse than the heavy tank, the FCM50T. Unfortunately for the Super Pershing, it only has 170mm of penetration on its standard rounds. That is the worst on any tier 8, 9 or 10 tank, premium or non-premium, for AP. Luckily, however, the Pershing does have very nice premium rounds. The penetration goes from 170 up to 258. And so if you find yourself against something truly heavily armored, then a quick dab of the 2 key and bang, you've got 50% more penetration. But that kind of defeats one of the reasons why you're probably going to play the Super Pershing, i.e. to make credits. And if you're having to spend credits just to deal damage, then that's not great. Now this penetration would be absolutely atrocious if the vehicle could meet tier 10 tanks. And you just got to thank your lucky souls with the Super Pershing that you don't ever have to deal with any tier 10 tanks, hey? So the 90mm on this vehicle has a standard 240 alpha damage, and the tank's shell velocity isn't very impressive at 975. The tank has enough ammunition, at least it's got more than the FE4202P, and it's got that 10 extra alpha damage. But unlike the Pershing and the FCM52, you do start to feel like you kind of run out of ammunition when you get up into the 5,000 damage games, or if you've just been bouncing a lot of your standard ammunition. Now the aim time on the Super Pershing is 2.3 seconds, which is the same as the regular Pershing, the FE4202P, and the FCM50T. But remember, Wargaming like to hide dispersion stats from you in the garage, and the Super Pershing's dispersion is way worse than that of the regular Pershing, and is significantly worse even than the FE4202P and the FCM50T. And so don't be deceived by that 2.3 seconds aim time, because it does feel a hell of a lot longer, and the only good thing is that you're not going to be going anywhere quick enough to be able to make your vehicle bloom up unless you're going downhill. Now the accuracy on this vehicle is also a disappointing 0.38, which is worse than all of the other tanks in this comparison apart from the T34-3, but again, that's got that derpy 122mm gun. Thankfully, the Super Pershing does have excellent gun depression of 10 degrees, which makes it very flexible if you get it on a ridgeline, and also allows it to hide some of its upper turret armor, as I'm going to highlight later on. So you might think, looking at the Super Pershing's top speed limit, that 40 kilometers an hour isn't really that bad, especially considering to the relatively new FE4202P has a worst in category 35 kilometers an hour. But it's when you look at the engine on the Super Pershing, which has got 500 horsepower, and when you take into account the vehicle weighs 50 tons, that it makes its horsepower to ton ratio less than 10. That is absolutely horrific. This has got the worst horsepower to ton ratio on any medium tank that's higher than tier 5. Thank you, Matilda Black Prince. And while it looks like the FE4202P also has a bad horsepower to ton ratio at 12.34, the FE4202P has amazing ground resistances, which makes up for this power to weight ratio being low. However, the Super Pershing gets no slack with its ground resistances, having worse performance on hard, medium and soft than all of these other vehicles. This makes the Super Pershing pretty much the slowest high tier medium tank by a long shot. And so if you do pick up one of these vehicles, unless you're going downhill, you are going to be like a pretty slow heavy tank. Furthermore, the vehicle's turret traverse is a god-awful 24 degrees a second, which is worse than many heavy tanks. The FE4202P's turret traverse is 50% better than the Super Pershing, with the T34-3 able to traverse its turret at nearly a double rate. Thankfully, the track traverse on the vehicle isn't that bad at 32 degrees a second, but that's still way worse than all of the other vehicles in this comparison. So you might look at the armor and the health of the tank and think, well, it's what, worse than the regular Pershing? What's the point of this vehicle? But that's where you would be very, very mistaken, because this doesn't take into account the incredible spaced armor and the riot shield that the Super Pershing has. Here is the Super Pershing's armor, and as we can see, there's a big slab of spaced armor over the front of the vehicle. 88mm, 114mm of spaced armor, followed by 100mm behind that over the turret. And even over the sides of the turret, we can see it's got 76mm of spaced armor that gives you quite a lot of protection on the side. With regards to the hull, it's got 38mm of spaced armor, followed by another sheet of 38mm of spaced armor. And then you have to get through the 76mm of lower plate armor or the 101mm of upper plate armor that this vehicle has. If I show you the live model, these two spaced shields do become quite a lot more apparent. Here we can see the dark blue and the second layer on the outside being here. This spaced armor absorbs heat rounds like a total boss, so if you think that you can just press your 2 key to be able to compensate for this spaced armor on the Super Pershing, well, you're very wrong. This means that if the Super Pershing driver angles his hull armor optimally like this, that the upper plate is up to 240mm thick all the way across, with the lower plate also being between 200 to 240mm. This makes the armor on the Super Pershing very comfortable and obvious to use, and it's very friendly towards a beginner. However, just don't allow them to get the side of your tank, because as we can see here, it's not even 100mm of effective, even with the tracks absorbing some of the damage, and the side of the turret is below 100 even when angled, and the rear of the tank, well, that would be a disaster. So you want to try and keep your front towards your opponents at all possible costs with the Super Pershing. And let's not forget that the bad turret traverse on the tank of 24 degrees a second quite often means that this is a difficult thing to do to prevent people from getting the side of your turret. So quite often people fight the Super Pershing and they think that it's just indestructible, but it does have a couple of weaknesses that I'd like to highlight frontally that you can take advantage of. Number one is this machine gun port. There is actually a gap in the spaced armor for the machine gun to be able to shoot through. And also, if we look at the live version of this armor model, we can see that the second spaced armor plate is actually missing above the machine gun. And so that means that if you can hit the machine gun directly, you only need 76mm of penetration to go through the Super Pershing. And if you aim slightly above that, you only have to go through 38mm of spaced armor, giving it an effective value of less than 190. So for example, if you've got an IS-3, this might be a good shot for you to make. My second tip is to try and go for the cupolas of the Super Pershing. There is a gap in the spaced armor up the top, but one word of advice, don't try and shoot the right cupola because it's actually not fully modeled. It's the left cupola when you're facing the vehicle that you want to go for. And if you shoot this part of the tank, unless you get exceptionally unlucky, you should be able to go through it reliably with about 150mm of penetration. One thing a skilled Super Pershing driver will try and do to avoid people from shooting his cupola is to raise his gun and to wiggle his turret to try and block the shot, or at least just make it more difficult for you to hit. However, if you see a Super Pershing doing this, then one word of advice, he's actually creating a gap in his spaced armor here, and you can easily go through the sides of his turret. So what we actually find is that outside of these two weak points that can be quite tricky to hit, the Super Pershing does have some of the best armor on any preferential matchmaking tank, at least frontally in the game. And thankfully the vehicle also has a nice slab of hit points, 1,500 to be exact. And also the view range doesn't disappoint too. 390 meters means that if you use coated optics on this vehicle and you have a decent crew, it'll be very easy to get up to a highly competitive view range on the Super Pershing. And so I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go, I'm playing on Himmelsdorf Encounter, and half of my team are tier 8 and... what? 2/3 of the enemy are tier 8? Oh gosh, they've got 2 extra tier 8 tanks than us. They've also got 3 self-propelled guns, which is a bit of a concern with the Super Pershing, but thankfully I'm going to use Castle von Himmelsdorf to be able to avoid their praying eyes. Well, hopefully at least that's the plan. Thankfully, I've spawned at the top of the hill, because look how long it takes us to get up it. 9 kilometers an hour, and I am thrashing the engine to try and get up this hill. Trust me, I'm just very happy that I didn't spawn down where the OI is. Well, a good shot there by the FV304. I'm not even kidding you. Look where it went into the tank, right through the commander's hatch in the top. What a horrendous start to this game for me. 455 damage done, and I lost my commander, but a quick dab of the 5 and the 1, and we put him back into action. So here we can see a Type 58 trying to run away from me, get an idea of what the aim time is like on the Super Pershing. It just didn't feel quite good enough there for me to take the shot, but maybe I could have snapshotted it. So talking about the T-34-3 that I made with the comparison, the Tier 8 Chinese medium tank also with preferential matchmaking, let's see how the Super Pershing deals with him. So he ricochets off our lower plate. Great result for us, and we put 2 rounds into him, taking him out the game early. It's a nice result. So this fight up on top of the hill is looking a little bit ugly right now. Look at this. We have a T-34, myself, and a T-54 Mod 1 versus a gigantic amount of the enemy team. But you know what? This is the Super Pershing in its environment. It has its opponents directly in front of it, and it just gets to harass them one by one by one, hopefully. Now, the worst thing that could happen for us right now is if the enemies rushed round and tried to get the side of our tank. But luckily, we've got this T-54 Mod 1 backing us up, and also, we do have these 2 tank destroyers, well, 3 tank destroyers down this alleyway, who, if the enemies try and rush through, we'll be able to punish them in the side. So we're just doing some standard work here with the 90mm gun. I'm constantly having a look behind me to make sure that the other flank hasn't been lost with that T-34. But luckily we've got some nice shots through here into the T-10. And also you can see that I'm taking on Tier 8 tanks right now. Well, at least they're giving me their side armor with standard ammunition in the Super Pershing. So you can make that 170mm of penetration go a long way. And these are the kind of shots where you start to make gigantic amounts of credits with the Super Pershing. When you're penetrating your non-premium rounds on enemy vehicles, it is literally just money in the bank. So we can see the T-34 has been set on fire. They are exposing themselves, it looks like, to all of the tanks that you see down on my right here. And that's great for us. And it doesn't look like the enemies have located at the D3 area, or if they are, they're shooting up at us and they're not able to get through my pretty darn thick even front, and also the side of my turret armor with the spaced on the front. And this is working out very well for us indeed. We've done 2,800 damage. We're also doing some great amount of assistance damage. We set the 110 on fire, and our artillery are doing us proud with the shots up. So now the game is starting to get a little bit ugly. We've got a Tiger 2, we've got an IS-3 that's on full health, and an AMX 1375 that's trying to push around the corner. And there's also a Pershing left there. We do manage to go through the Tiger 2's lower plate there with a standard round again, but when you're dealing with an IS-3 frontally, really you probably want to start to use some premium ammunition. So I'm going to load 1 here, let's watch out for that. And right now I'm absolutely terrified because the AMX 1375 and the Pershing are no longer spotted, and they might be trying to get our flank and be able to take us out. This T-54 Mod 1 does come out in front of me, which frustrates me a little bit. I'm terrified about the AMX 1375 coming round the corner behind me, and I want to side scrape right now. I don't want to expose my cupola to the IS-3, don't want to sit there in the open and allow him to get my inside tracks, so I decide to try and go in front of the T-54 Mod 1 to be able to avoid taking the shot from the IS-3 and getting flanked from the 1375, who eventually did come behind us, but luckily we do manage to take him down. Now in retrospect, looking back on that actually was a bit of an ugly move. Fair enough, there was a lot of pressure on me, but I do feel a little bit bad about how I pushed in front of the T-54 Mod 1. And in retrospect, yeah, I do feel like that was a little bit of a dick move. While I was worried about this AMX 1375 and the Pershing flanking me and getting my very weak side and rear armor, and so I was trying to hurry to kill that IS-3 and getting a little bit frustrated by the T-54 Mod 1 coming out just as I was finishing reloading. I guess I could have just left him to fight the IS-3 and turn around my tank to deal with the AMX 1375 myself. But just take a look at the tank graveyard that we were able to create up on the hill by locking them down in the line of fire of our allies, and also dishing out quite a lot of damage ourselves, considering that this game was just over 4 minutes long. I picked this game because frankly this was the Super Pershing in its environment, a frontal engagement against opponents that were willing to give up weak points, while also being unable to flank you because they were getting nailed from down the alleyway. Furthermore, we didn't have to drive more than a couple of 100 meters in this game, so the Super Pershing's worst-in-class mobility didn't really come into effect. But how about when it does? What kind of games do you have when you have to use some of the mobility, perhaps when you've got a very good team? So now I'm playing on Tundra, and I'm going to replay this video at 2 times speed. Don't worry, the Super Pershing isn't this fast. Just to show you how fast it is going along the slope here. It's going at about 26 kilometers an hour. Okay, let's go back up to double speed. So we're being overtaken by tanks like the T-54 Mod 1. The IS-3 is racing away faster than we ever could. And take a look at this VK4502A. Fair enough, that's not the slowest heavy tank in the world, But look at it. That's how fast it's overtaking us. This is at 1x speed again here. The Super Pershing is barely getting up to 10 to 12 kilometers an hour up that slope. It's absolutely horrendous. And what that means is that before we've even managed to get into position, the initial tanks that you usually get the soft shots into with your medium tanks are already gone. The T-34-1 is dead, and this AMX CDC is already losing most of his health. We noticed that a cheeky Crusader is getting some shots into us from behind. We managed to put a sneaky shot into his turret. I was lucky that that one went in, and we keep trundling up the slope on our way towards the AMX CDC, and we only get 34 damage from him. Gosh, that's a little bit disappointing. So from here on, I'm trying to think, is it best to stay up here and snipe? Surely some enemies will come into our line of fire. Maybe we can hit that Jagdtiger 88. Maybe this IS-3 will reverse. And by hesitating here in the Super Pershing, I'm not going to have the speed now required to be able to flank my opponents. So what I probably should have done is just gone down the hill towards the north, raced away, and maybe I could have got some soft damage into the Ferdinand or the Jagdtiger 88. And so even though this game is only a couple of minutes long, it's already too late for me to be able to get into the rest of it. And so when you do have exceptionally good teams, it is very, very hard to farm damage in the Super Pershing. You have to be literally ridiculously aggressive, relentlessly just charging down your opponents, and just hope that you can get some kind of damage before the game is over, frankly. And from here, of course, I don't get anything, right? Because I'm playing in the slowest high-tier medium tank in the game. And so this is definitely something to take into account. You saw the fantastic situation where the enemies are just lining up one by one by one by one in front of the Super Pershing, and you've got some supporting tanks with you. They don't try to flank you. And so that's where the Super Pershing looks awesome with its farming capabilities. But then you get into games like this where you think you've taken your tank into the correct position, but you're frankly just too slow to be able to get there for the initial onslaught and too slow to be able to chase anything down towards the end of the round. So the first result on Himmelsdorf was an absolute monster result that happened during a 5x experience event. 15,201 experience. My M48A1 crew will be exceptionally happy with that. We also got 144,000 credits, and I think I only fired a handful of premium rounds, meaning that we made 130,000 credits profit after resupplying the ammunition and repairing the vehicle. We got a high caliber medal, and unsurprisingly in the Super Pershing, and you do get a lot of them, a steel wall. That was 4,447 damage for our 5 kills, 1,661 base experience points. We took 13 hits, 2,145 damage was blocked by our armor, and we also did quite a lot of detecting and detracking damage. 1,843 to be exact, and we were also spotting for ourselves the whole time, which is why this was an absolute payday of a game. But now from hero to zero. Here we go. This was our result on Tundra. We got 35,000 credits, but then again, that's still 34,000 credits profit, even though we played like trash. We finished 11th on experience, 494 base, 502 damage done. While we see the faster tier 8 premium medium tanks did have the speed to be able to get where they needed to go to spot, to deal damage, to gain the experience, and to get the credits. And so you're basically seeing the best and the worst of the Super Pershing. But you know what, in the end, the good and the bad does combine into quite a nice, tidy result. Here we can see we're getting 1,075 average experience in the Super Pershing, 65% wins when I've been playing this tank, mostly solo, but I will admit that I haven't really been playing the Super Pershing until recently, and it's only because I've been wanting to train up my M48A1 crew. And I feel that as I start to learn how aggressive you need to be in the Super Pershing, I should be able to push it up a little bit higher. The Super Pershing is an absolute bizarre tier 8 premium tank that will leave many frustrated at its worst in class mobility, and others exasperated at its worst in class penetration of 170mm on its AP rounds. But when you start to learn what targets require 170mm of penetration and what targets require 258mm of penetration, you'll find the balance of both being competitive and also being very profitable indeed. The fact that outside of these couple of weak points, the vehicle has some of the heaviest armor on any preferential matchmaking tank in the game will make it a very attractive prospect to heavy players who maybe want to pick up something that is frankly darn cheap. 7,200 gold for the Super Pershing is a much better deal than picking up, say, a T34 for 12,000 gold, considering that I think that you will be pretty much just as profitable in the Super Pershing if you figure out how to play it as you would in the T34, especially so considering that the standard rounds on this tank are practically free at 255 credits per shot. And so the Super Pershing is like Marmite, you either love it or you hate it, right? And I have to admit, for the last 4 years I have despised this tank because frankly I like my mediums to have a bit of mobility. But once you get over the fact that the Super Pershing is more like a very slow heavy with fantastic frontal armor, and you take it into positions which you think super heavy tanks will do well in, then it can actually be, you know what, I'm going to say it, fairly okay in quite a few games, but others immensely frustrating. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed this tank review, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving it a like down below, it really helps the channel out. And let me know in the comments down below, are you a Super Pershing lover or are you a Super Pershing hater? And as always, thank you so much for watching, you've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.